Much has been said in recent days about the child rape grooming scandal by a number of leading figures, including British politicians like Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, and controversial agitators like Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk, the owner of X.
Yes, repeated demands have been made for the government to agree a nationwide public inquiry, but the Prime Minister has refused so far.
Amid all the noise, the voices that have struggled to be heard, ironically, are those belonging to the survivors of this appalling abuse. Those still living with the consequences of what has been described as one of the biggest scandals in modern British history have spent too long being silenced and deserve to be heard.
So, as we said yesterday in the podcast, we are dedicating today's Daily Tea to your interview, Camilla, with Gaia Cooper, who survived being criminally exploited and repeatedly raped by a grooming gang when she was just 14. She has written a book called Modern Slave, which was published by HarperCollins in June, in which she details her horrific ordeal. Camilla, you caught up with Gaia this week. To protect her identity, we are using her pen name, and her words are voiced by our producer, Georgia Cohen.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey.
And me, Kamal Ahmed.
So for obvious reasons, I didn't ask Gaia to relive every single detail of what happened to her. That would be far too painful, and it is very extensively covered in her book. So I'm basically going to summarise the story now. She didn't have a good relationship with her mother and describes herself of the black sheep of the family. At the age of 14, she ends up making a life-changing decision. She gets into a car with a couple of 20-something Muslim men that she names Ali and Sal, who had befriended another teenager she was friends with called Scarlett. It's 1999 and we are in southern England. Nowhere, incidentally, that has ever been subject to an inquiry. In a bid to fit in and seeking the affection she's missing at home, she finds herself smoking cannabis, drinking alcohol, and being asked to buy goods including cigarettes, phone top-up cards, and clothes with stolen credit cards. As the grooming continues, she stops attending school, her relationship with her mother breaks down completely, and she ends up in care. Despite being firmly on social services' radar, it's not long before she starts to be passed around the men and their associates for sex. She's beaten up on a number of occasions. She's violently raped multiple times by many different men, and she continues to be criminally and sexually exploited, despite converting to Islam in a bid to gain the grooming gang's respect. By the time she manages to escape, this is in the early 2000s, she has a criminal record of 22 offences. She's pregnant with her first child, and she's in an abusive relationship with the child's father. It's not until more than a decade later, in 2015, by which point the media is starting to cover and uncover grooming gangs, that the police knock on the door and inform her that they believe she's been a victim of child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation. I started by asking her how the grooming began. It goes without saying that you may find this interview rather distressing to listen to.
So I think it was because of the breakdown in the relationship with my mum at home. It was difficult. So I kind of just very quickly wanted to be accepted by somebody else, and I think it could have been anything. If it was something healthy, I would have probably navigated towards that. But because it was what it was, and those people obviously had, their own agendas and their own ideas of what they wanted me to do, then that's what it became. When we're young, everything seems so much more heightened, like it's scary. I think I just immediately just didn't really know what to say, because I didn't know how to act around these older people. So I just was very quiet and kind of just wanted to make myself invisible, I think. Maybe that was my way of just protecting myself from either being ridiculed or anything happening to me.
So you describe yourself as this kind of skinny girl with glasses. You're quite academically bright, like you have the potential to do well at school. And you're not from some deprived home or the wrong side of the tracks, although there was clearly a breakdown in your relationship with your mum. I know that there are some young women who experience this grooming and they were from a more socio-economically deprived background. But I wouldn't describe you as that girl.
People do believe that for this to happen to you, you have to be poverty-stricken. You're sat outside the chip shop and stuff like that. But this can happen to any child. They will probably go for some that are quite affluent and get them to commit crimes against their parents. You know, take your dad's credit card if he's a businessman or stuff like that. These men, they don't just prey on those girls from deprived backgrounds. Yes, it probably makes it a lot more of an advantage for them if there aren't parents out there, you know, combing the streets or calling 999. That might make it a bit easier, but they don't really care. It's not even just in those sorts of areas. Like, it can happen in a rural county. It can happen in the Midlands. It could happen anywhere.
So the police turn up at your door in 2015 and they suggest to you that you may have been the victim of child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation. That is reflecting on this period of your life from 1999 to the early 2000s when this has all happened. But when all this took place, you were 14. So you were a child, and they're only coming to you sort of a decade later to inform you that basically you're the victim. Although you may have been criminalised as a teenager, actually you're the victim in all this. What was your response to that?
I immediately burst into tears because it was the first time anyone had almost said, you're not at fault, you're not the bad one. Not like, oh, you've got this dodgy checkered history. So when they told me that, I was devastated, but also I was quite indignant because, like, okay, so you're telling me this now, but then why was I put on a bus to go and do community service? Why was I put through the court systems all this time? Why did you lock me up in cells and, like, I had to be criminalised? And I do have a criminal record, like quite a long one as a child offender, but now you're telling me that you can see that I was exploited and groomed.
When you were a teenager, Gaia, how many crimes were you found guilty of committing? What was your record, so to speak?
I have about 22 convictions. In amongst that is possession of cannabis, which I was holding for somebody else. It was only a small quantity of personal cannabis, also theft. Those are all as a child. I've not committed any crime as an adult.
And throughout that period, you were just treated as a sort of teenage tearaway, would you say? Like, you're the perpetrator, there's no way you're the victim.
No, I mean, one officer told me that I was a lovable rogue because I'm not one of them that starts effing and blinding at the police and stuff like that. Obviously, sometimes I'd get a bit upset and, you know, might say, get off me or something, but I was never rude to them or ignorant towards the police. I've not really been brought up like that. But I do remember the first time I got arrested. They skipped a caution because they deemed the offence too serious. So I've never actually received a caution for any of those crimes.
And then what was the attitude towards any sexual activity between you and the people grooming you? Was the view by the police, the social workers, that it was all in some way consensual?
Well, I don't think the police ever really spoke to me about what wasn't seen. But in social care records, absolutely, that was mentioned numerous times, that they knew that I was engaging in unprotected sex with multiple men, and that's mentioned throughout my social care records. I think if you can't say no to criminal elements and then you're in a situation and you don't know how to say no, and you're underage, and they're obviously older than you, it's rape. Sometimes you tell yourself, oh, but I didn't start screaming and shouting. I didn't say stop. I didn't pull out my rape alarm and start, you know, shouting from the rooftops and running, because you do go into a kind of almost submissive state. You think, okay, I'll just, you know, get this over with, pacify the situation, and then everything will be back to normal. Everything will be fine. And then it happens on a repeat cycle or repeat loop. And then you know it's wrong and it feels wrong. And then obviously going back and seeing social workers' records, I know that they knew it was wrong, but they didn't actively do anything or stop me or stop them.
But what was the modus operandi? Was it part of the deal that you would be available to these men sexually?
I think because to them, we were just disposable. Oh, they'll make us money and then at the end of the day, use her however you like. To them, that seems like jolly good fun. For me, I can't think of anything more grubby and disgusting than using a child to A, do your dirty work, and B, then have sex with them. They should feel absolutely sickened with themselves. And so should the authorities that let it happen and didn't intervene. They should have taken me far away from the situation and put me on an order where I wasn't obtainable to anyone and just let me be a child.
That's a point, actually. You say you were placed in care around the corner from where the abusers were, so you just couldn't escape it. I don't want to make you relive this and go through all of the gory details, but do you know, and I'm sorry this is a really difficult question to ask you, do you know how many times you were raped and by how many different men?
I couldn't tell you. And I try not to think about it because it makes me feel quite unclean.
At one point, you're taken into the family home of one of the members of the grooming gang, and you're actually getting on okay with the women in that home, the Muslim women there. And you convert to Islam in a bid to sort of be accepted by the groomers, to not be seen as disposable and trash and second class. And then a relative comes into the house in the night and brutally rapes you downstairs in the living room. I mean, you're there in a hijab and a burqa. That must have been so confusing and horrendous.
This is the part where I get upset because, but obviously religion and that kind of acceptance, that was clean and pure and right, but it was then tarnished. For me, I think it was the most catastrophic and devastating thing.
I mean, you expected to receive some respect for converting, but instead you are treated with utter contempt.
Yeah, it just sent the message really that it doesn't matter what you do, whether you think that you've turned a corner and you've got this new start and this fresh page. You know, when you revert to Islam, they say it's like you're a newborn baby. Your sins are wiped. And it just felt to me like, no, that's not allowed for me.
Do you think that as well as there being an abuse of power in terms of older men and younger girls, underage girls, let's be clear about that, that there was also a degree to which your colour and creed and class, you being a white girl, made you inferior and therefore you were targeted on that basis? You say in the book that your abusers often called you a white slag. They called you a kafir, which is a derogatory term used to describe white people, and they use the term white trash.
I don't want to say that they don't treat their own kind like that, because I know in some situations they do. They do treat women inferior anyway in their own culture. But I do think me being a non-Muslim white girl made me a plaything, immaterial, like it doesn't matter, almost that I wouldn't have counted. As long as they don't treat their own women like that, then it's fine. We were disposable, like trash, basically.
Do you also think that the authorities were treating you a bit like that? There's a sense to which, if police officers weren't expressing too many concerns about you, the people in positions of authority were also sort of turning a blind eye to your underage sexual activity with much older men, that to a certain extent they were also treating you, and I'm just quoting this, you know, in the same way as your abusers, like a little slag.
Yeah, in my social care reports, time and time again, it says she's taking risk-taking behaviours. She's making lifestyle choices. She won't stop hanging around with these older men. And it repeats throughout. And it's quite shocking to see that that was their perception of what was going on.
Were the abusers sort of living parallel lives, do you think? Were they pretending to be one thing and then doing another? Was it underground? Do you think the wives and girlfriends and daughters knew? How did it play out in reality?
I think it's quite in plain sight. These people, they're not criminal masterminds, but they're opportunists. I think it was quite in plain sight for everyone to see.
And when you think about your abusers now, I mean, what do you think? How do you cope with what happened? You were diagnosed with PTSD afterwards. this whole thing then resurfaces in 2015 when you get that police knock on the door, which must have been extremely difficult to sort of comprehend. And I would assume at that point your children are a little older, you're trying to turn a corner in your life. It must have brought it all horrifically flooding back.
I think with regards to the perpetrators, I don't think about them at all. And that's not in the sense of, I want retribution or justice or anything. I have to completely take them out of my mind.
Do you wish that because you didn't go to court in the end? Does part of you wish that they were in prison and that they did see justice?
I feel that with the justice system, it's so difficult to not traumatise yourself by going through that. With any girls that have taken their abusers to account, I think they're the bravest of the brave. It's amazing. Because once you get cross-examined by the defence and stuff like that, it's truly, really traumatising, horrific. It's not something that I could cope with. So the way I've coped is I decided to contact the Ombudsman and I took the social services to task because I wanted them to be held accountable. It took 4 years.
So once you'd kind of been told that the state, in inverted commas, now believe that you're a victim of child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation, you then think, well, hang on a minute. What about all of those organisations that exist to safeguard me? Surely they failed in their duty of care, and you decide to sue them.
Suing the social services was the easiest option for me to feel that I'd made someone accountable. I can't make my mum feel accountable because she doesn't. She doesn't accept any failing. She's, I didn't know what to do. So the social workers, they're the ones that are paid to look after you, paid to keep you safe. I feel very indignant towards them. They're supposed to be the good guy. You've gone to university to get those social work degrees. Why'd you let this happen to me?
So you took social services, the local social services, to court.
Yep.
And you received a payout from them.
Yes.
And how did that make you feel? Did that help or not?
Honestly, no. It was painful. It was sometimes draining and tiring. I don't think it did help.
What would help you to feel justice now?
I think it would help if schools included it in the curriculum. With regards to this inquiry that everyone wants, we know how many people were killed in Grenfell. We know how many people died at Hillsborough. We don't know how many survived this.
So you do support this idea for a judge-led public inquiry, a new inquiry into this?
Yeah. It's in each town in our country. It's on a national scale. And I know that's going to take a lot of work. And I'm sorry that it's going to take that much work, but that's what's going to need to be done. We don't know how many of these survivors are dead, whether that's at the hands of the abuser or not, taking their own life or through drugs because of the trauma that they've had to navigate. We don't know that yet because no one's cared enough to ask us. The J report obviously cost a lot of money and a lot of resources, but the answers aren't really there. And the recommendations still haven't been implemented. So it needs to be, I don't know, whether getting a report in or just re-looking over it and making sure that it's been implemented. But having listened this week in Parliament, it's going to be mandatory for child abuse to be reported. It should have been mandatory anyway. That should be a given. But I think people do want answers. I think people need to be sure that their children are going to be kept safe in the future.
I mean, you've managed quite remarkably, considering everything you've been through, to turn your life around. You're now a proud mum to 2 children. You're working and you've been in work. In a way, yours is a hopeful story. You had a very low period where you did try and take your own life. But now we're 20 years on from this horrific period. And where are you now, do you think?
I think, there's been a lot of growth in there. Sometimes it's situations and relationships. I've been re-traumatised and I've not been the best mentally. I think I have to do what I have to do. I make myself feel okay. I do things that are very different to my friends. Like they might go out socialising and, go for lunch, and whereas I'd rather just go to the garden centre by myself. I like to do very solitary tasks. Like I like to be on my own a lot.
So it's not just the grooming that has affected your life. It's also the ramifications of how you view yourself and the relationships that you've chosen, perhaps due to a lack of self-worth that, again, no one can really account for.
I think that's just patterns of behaviour, that it's like low self-worth, low self-esteem. Outwardly, I could say that I'm proud of myself. I can tell you my good points, but it's just the entrenched not feeling good enough. And I don't know if I try and fix people that are bad for me, or if subconsciously I don't feel worthy of that kind of love. I don't know.
And has the kind of resurgence of talk about all this been triggering? What do you think of Elon Musk commenting, or Nigel Farage, or even Tommy Robinson's supporters saying that he's the hero of this hour?
I definitely wouldn't call him the hero of the hour, because even if you can take the positives out of it being thrown into the spotlight because of their comments aren't helpful. And I don't think that survivors' well-being is at the heart of that. It's almost like a trolling kind of culture. You know, for Elon Musk to call Jess Phillips a child rape genocide sympathiser or something, that's not helpful to survivors. It's fighting fire with fire, really. If you're asking somebody to stand up and listen and fight for children using language like that, it's not helpful. Survivors, victims of historical cases, they're trying to live with and navigate the trauma on their own without any support. So, yeah, it's not helpful to have Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson. I don't think they lose a wink of sleep over a survivor. It's quite narcissistic to make it about them, that they're the heroes. But, yeah, it can only be a good thing to highlight it.
I know you've gone into schools and spoken about your experience, and you mentioned earlier that it should be part of the national curriculum. What's it actually like talking about your story with school children?
I think when I summarise it, when I speak in schools, I try to talk about it objectively, because I would hate for people not to get the message that I'm trying to give. I wouldn't want someone to just think, oh, you know, that's so sad. I hope that doesn't happen to me. I want there to be change in schools. I think they're pushing algebra and stuff like that, and they should be pushing, now more than ever, online safety. Children are being recruited by Snapchat. They're being recruited online so much more easily than they were back in early 2000s, 1999, because we've got so many different criminal gangs that are operating behind screens, and they're either targeting them for sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, drug crime, stuff like that. It's not just girls, it's happening to both sexes. These organised crime groups, crime gangs, are using children to recruit children. So you might get a 17-year-old say to a younger teen, do you want to come and make some money with me? And they're easily malleable because they see this life and it looks like, oh yeah, I'd like a new pair of trainers or this and that. That is the absolutely furthest thing from what these children will be getting out of it. The gangs then send the children out, you know, give them a phone, load them up with drugs, and off they go. And if they do something wrong, not meeting people on time, or if they come back short, those children are getting hit. That is happening constantly. So if you go into a school and I talk about myself and what happened to me, that's fine. But my goal is always that I go away from there making it clear that this is happening to children now. That's the bit that makes me sick to my stomach. I'm okay within myself. I'm at peace with my trauma. But the fact that children are still being used by adults, and whether that's sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, anything that feels uncomfortable or unsafe to a child that they don't want to do, I think these men, or organised crime groups, men, women, whatever they are, should be treated by the law as paedophiles, as sex offenders. If you're using a child to do your dirty work, you're a paedophile.
And then finally, Gaia, in terms of advice, if people fear that somebody that they know, or their child, or someone, it might be a friend, it might be a relative, is being groomed, or indeed a girl appears to be in an inappropriate relationship with a much older man, what should people actually do?
I would say to speak to the child first. Let them know that they're loved, they're safe. They don't have to immediately disclose everything to you, because if you push for a disclosure straight away, they can clam up and it's quite scary. I would take advice from social care and the police. probably more so the police and then social care. There are avenues you can go down where it's not a child protection issue within the home. Contextual safeguarding is outside the home. So the perpetrator is outside of the home, and that is recognised now. And hopefully your local authority will know how to deal with that.
I mean, when you think about it, we have schools regularly educating its pupils on issues like periods, safe sex, stranger danger, drugs and alcohol. Should they also be warning kids about grooming and the threat posed to them by criminal gangs?
They should send a letter out literally every 6 weeks, holiday, every half term. Get the children to open up that dialogue with their parents about what could happen, whether it's even somebody that's slightly older than them. So it might seem like it's a peer-on-peer thing and they're being recruited. Like, they need to be made aware of what can happen to their child and open up that dialogue so that the child feels safe to disclose that if it happens.
Gaia, I just want to thank you so much for being so candid and revealing details that must be really quite painful to relive here on the Daily Tea. I just want to remind you of Gaia's book. It's available now. It's published by HarperCollins and it's called A Modern Slave, A Vulnerable Girl, A Gang of Vicious Men, A Shocking True Story of Survival. Thank you very much, Gaia.
Thank you. The reason why I wanted to speak out about this is because we've not heard from the survivors. And I feel like I don't want people to look at me and be like, oh, poor her. And, you know, we're survivors and people should really just listen to what we have to say and help us to get our message across. For far too long, we haven't been listened to. We haven't had justice. It's time for our voices to be heard. What we want now is action to be taken.
Kamal, it's always difficult when you can't actually use the voice of the person speaking to you. And let's just pay tribute there to our brilliant producer, Georgia Cohen, who stepped in to voice Gaia's testimony there. She understandably didn't want her voice on tape, and we respected that. But I just want to sort of describe her because Georgia's done a really good job of communicating the very, very, at times emotional, but also sensible and salient points she was raising about how she was failed by multiple authorities. And when I met her this week, you know, I can't really stress more. I think we put a picture in our mind of what these survivors are like. She's just an ordinary woman now in her late 30s, who has had to comprehend what went on when she was a teenager. She's quite softly spoken. She's very gentle. She was really very insistent that we didn't, I quote her now, she's like, do not make this whiny. I do not want to come across like, oh, poor her. That's not what I'm like. She's really just a quietly self-confident woman. She doesn't give herself enough credit for how well she has coped with what she's gone through. You know, sometimes you just meet people and you think, my God, I can't really comprehend what you've had to survive, basically. But she's come out of it the other side. And that's why all of this chat about the inquiry and what's gone on, that's why it's so valuable. Can we just go back to the people who were affected by this directly and speak to them? Let's get their ideas of how we move this situation forward.
It was really amazing to listen to that for the first time. As you say, Camilla, you know, you will have been through the transcript. You did the interview yourself. It's an amazing interview. Georgia did a brilliant job at bringing that interview to life in her words. But listening to it in the gallery, as I've just done for the first time, it is just so moving. It is bravery. I know that she doesn't want to be seen as, in some way, maybe even a hero to people, but she should be seen because it's people like Gaia coming forward and revealing those types of stories and where the real problems lie. And just her words about Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson and all the noise, the social media noise. I thought her point about how can you imagine that fighting for justice for people traumatized by sexual abuse as children is calling politicians of whatever persuasion, but women, apologists for rape. Elon Musk's comments about Jess Phillips. The fact is that is not helping anyone. Where Elon Musk could actually help as a tech expert is working out how you stop social media platforms being the place where this is being the facilitator of these types of drug gangs. And then the second thing that just so came across beyond her amazing testimony was yet again, and Camilla, how many times have we spoken about this? Social services, the authorities, local authorities, to an extent the police, have failed here and do not know, don't seem to respond in a way that gets to a solution and clears up or in some way tackles the huge problems that she's raised.
When the scandal first came to light, I think it was Jack Straw, the former Labour Home Secretary, who described the white teenage survivors of this, that they had been treated as sort of easy meat. And the hardest part of hearing her story was that she wasn't just treated like that by her abusers. She was treated like that by the authorities. There was no one was asking any questions about why a 14-year-old from a pretty respectable home had found herself being sexually passed around literally, more than 10, more than 20 men. I find that so hard to comprehend. Oh, it's only in 2015 that the police realised that the crimes that she committed when she was coerced to do them pale into insignificance compared to what her abusers did to her.
They saw her as a criminal first. They framed who she was without thinking, why is this going on? The connection as well with general crime, county lines, drug dealing, theft, all these things are interwoven in a horrible mix. It doesn't matter whatever the background is of these young girls, whether they come from really tough backgrounds, whether they're not seen as ordinary, whether they are or, come from middle class. It literally does not matter what the background is. These people have been totally failed. Your interview, Camilla, will only increase the pressure for a nationwide inquiry, which the Telegraph is backing, because Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, the Prime Minister, have said that if the victims are demanding an inquiry, there should be an inquiry. And here is a victim, just one, but we know it's something that is agreed with by many people who have been the victim of this appalling UK-wide abuse. Gaia demanding that there is an inquiry so that we know how many people have been affected, why there's been this huge failure, is so important. And I find it will be difficult politically for the Labour government to continue with this defence that the inquiries we have had are sufficient.
Also, she raised such a good point about ongoing help for the survivors of this. I mean, she had indicated to me that after she decided that she didn't want to go to court, the police just quickly moved on. She's still left with the trauma she's suffered. There's an irony here that even the abusers that do end up in prison, they're probably given different courses. They may be labelled child sex offenders, but are helped to rehabilitate. What help is given to people who have been...
She's doing it herself. She's the person going around to schools.
She's had to self-heal, and now she's helping others. She hasn't received any state help. That's the other irony here. So if the inquiry, first of all, can, of course, bring justice to survivors, but could someone somewhere actually actively help them come to terms with what happened to them in life? I'm really grateful to Gaia for speaking to us. It's made for a very compelling episode of The Daily Tea. If you've been affected by anything that we've discussed on today's Daily Tea, do look in our show notes where we've provided the details of organisations that can help. And we're going to be back, Kamal, tomorrow at 5 p.m.